I was out early one March morning. The air crisp, a light frost crunching underfoot, and a low, faint mist. I walked often at this time as it allowed for a calm start to the day. I could see the field gate that leads to the lane which leads back to the village, when I heard a steady and consistent crunch, along with my own. It sounded as though it was catching up, so I stepped to the side to allow the fellow early morning enjoyer room to pass. No one came. I looked, but there was no one there. I got a cold shiver, as if someone had just walked over my grave. I could have sworn I heard footsteps approaching. I turned back and continued towards the gate. The sound behind me returns. I look over my shoulder, but still, I can't see anyone there. The mysterious pace quickens, sounding like a slow jog. I hasten my pace, my heart beating slightly faster as I still can't see anyone around and the gate seemingly slipping further away. My heart begins to race as I hear the pace increase behind me, as though the strange presence had begun to run at me. I burst into a sprint, frantically trying to reach the gate before the ghostly steps catch up with me. It's as if they're right behind me, so close they could reach out and grab me. I run straight into the gate, flinging it open as it rattles on its hinges. I fall to the ground and immediately spin around. There is no one there and the footsteps have stopped. I take a moment, my lungs burning from the frantic inhalation of the cold morning air, my eyes streaming and my nose running away from me. Now the morning silence, suddenly pressing and heavy, felt even colder. I scramble to my feet and dust myself down. Shaken, I head back down the lane and into the village. The village is a typical English village, the kind you would see on a postcard. A few thatched roofed cottages, the corner shop, the pub, the village green and duck pond, and the gently trickling brook steadily flowing through. I decide to pop into Mrs. Dawson's shop for some milk and this morning's newspaper. Mrs. Dawson, I say, loudly, trying to get her attention. That woman, she's always on that phone, gossiping even at this early hour. Just a pint of milk and the newspaper, Mrs. Dawson. I'll leave the payment on the counter. I leave some change on the counter and head back outside. I live only a few cottages down from Mrs. Dawson's shop, the one with the red wooden gate. As soon as I step through my gateway, I just about leap out of my skin. The neighbor's cat haunching its back, hissing and spitting viciously at me, as if this morning hasn't been bad enough already. The cat darts into the shrubbery, and after its warm welcome, I hurry inside. Tea, toast, and a flick through the paper should help put me at ease. I put a pot of tea on the hob, set the toaster, and sit down to read the headline. Like anything ever happens in the village. 4th of September. That can't be right. Must be a typo. Field killer still at large. Oh dear, I never heard about this. 6 months on and the local police are still none the wiser as to who Mr. Collins' murderer was on that cold, frosty March morning. Mr. Collins' hands begin to tremble, gripping the newspaper as the scream of the kettle and the strong smell of burnt toast fills the room. Late one night, I was walking down a quiet street when a little girl, with wide, worried eyes, approached me. She tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "My dad hasn't come home in days." Her voice was soft, yet laced with the kind of fear only a child could feel. The plea in her eyes was all it took. I knew then that I would search for her father. Days passed with little success until one morning, I met an old priest at a secluded temple on the outskirts of town. His gaze was distant as he spoke of an elder man he'd seen days before. He walked into the mansion near the waterfall, the priest told me, his voice solemn, and he hasn't come out since. With new hope, I set out toward the mansion. It loomed over the landscape, eerie and ancient, shrouded in mist from the roaring waterfall nearby. The stairs creaked beneath me as I climbed, each step crumbling slightly under my weight, as if the mansion itself was warning me to turn back. But I pressed on, determined to find the man for the sake of his daughter. As I reached the top floor, I felt my foot slip. With a crack, the stairs behind me collapsed, leaving me stranded. Heart pounding, I explored my surroundings, looking for another way down. That's when I noticed a piece of paper lying on the dusty floor, stained with something dark. I lifted it carefully, my stomach churning as I saw words written in blood. A man missing his little daughter. The words hit me with a pang of sorrow and fear. Was this the father I'd been searching for? My mind spiraled as the weight of the message sank in, and without realizing it, tears began to blur my vision. I stayed there for hours, pondering what this meant, why he had vanished, and how this tragic path had unfolded. Before I knew it, night had fallen, and the mansion seemed darker, more foreboding. In the dim moonlight, I tried to make my way around, searching for a way out. I stumbled forward and suddenly lost my balance. In an instant, I was tumbling backward down the side of the mansion and into the waterfall. The icy water engulfed me, and as I struggled to stay afloat, I felt the world slip away. When I opened my eyes, I found myself lying in my bed, breathless and shaken. It had been a dream, a terrible, sad dream that felt far too real. Later that morning, I went to work, carrying the memory of that haunting dream with me. Just as I was settling in, I turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was the little girl from my dream. Her eyes were still wide with worry as she looked up at me and said, "My dad went missing." At first, it seemed like something insignificant, just one of those oddities of the area. Raspberry bushes suddenly began to frost over, as if touched by winter's chill in the height of summer. No one could understand how it was possible, especially since the days were warm. But soon we realized it wasn't just about the cold. Those who tried to pick the berms began to freeze right before our eyes, their fingers seized by ice until they turned into frozen statues, standing silent among the bushes as ominous warnings. We imposed a strict rule. No one was to go near the berries, but the sinister cold emanating from them seemed to follow us, as though it was choosing its next victim. One evening, my friends and I gathered, laughing and talking about all sorts of nonsense, enjoying our time. Suddenly, I got distracted by a cat that ran past, and at that moment, a shout tore through the silence behind us. "Help! My grandma's been kidnapped, she's in the truck." I turned archened and, to my horror, realized that all my friends were gone. Panic gripped me, and without thinking, I dashed toward the garbage truck, which was just starting to move. I grabbed onto the side ladder and pulled myself up, holding my breath. I heard familiar voices calling to me, but from where? They echoed through the cargo hold, fading into the dull hum of the engine. I couldn't tell where that eerie, ghostly whisper was coming from. Soon, the voices fell silent, leaving me in frightening stillness. I started tearing through bags frantically, and eventually discovered a refrigerator, firmly mounted to the truck wall. I opened it, but it was strange. Layered, one compartment led to another, and the deeper I went, the stronger the feeling grew that someone knew I was there. Like a trap, the refrigerator lured me deeper. The cold gripped me, but I kept moving through the layers until I began to sense that the driver was likely waiting for me to crawl even further in so he could shut the door, leaving me there forever. In fear, I started throwing everything I could reach, hoping the chaos would make him stop. The truck jerked suddenly, and I heard the engine start to sputter. Came to a halt. The driver stepped out, not noticing me, holding a large container in his hands. I hid, watching him, and finally followed him into the darkness. He was cautious, but as soon as I got closer, he turned around and, as if he already knew I was there, smirked. "Did you really think you'd find them here?" His voice sounded hollow, as if coming from the darkness itself. "You've already realized I didn't take them, yet you still desperately searched for them. Deep down, you already know where they are." I froze as his words triggered a hazy memory. "Think back. Where did you feel that cold? My freezers have nothing to do with it." For some background information, I am 21F, living alone. My family lives off in another country, and I tend to stick to myself. I huddled towards the subway station after work. A shiver ran down my spine as I felt someone lay their eyes on me. I moved my head to look over my shoulder, and I saw through the enormous crowd a tall man in an oversized black hoodie glaring at me as if trying to pierce through my mind. Shoving people aside, I ran for the train. I felt everyone's anger grow as I pushed them away. Approaching the train with doors wide open like a gateway, I was ready to enter, but before I could move, the figure laid its hand on me. I froze. His hands were ice cold and clammy. The air left my lungs. There he was right behind me. Paralyzed, my mind raced. The world froze. I regained myself and inched towards the haven of the train. As my second foot made it in the doorway, I felt a wave of relief flush over me. I bolted for a seat. Settling on the blue bench, the world started playing again. Jerking forwards, I felt the train go into motion. Through the window, I saw the tall figure fade as the train left the station. Who was that? Was he actually there? Closing the door to my house, I made my way upstairs. With each step, my fear grew, replaying the memory of the man at the station, trying to find a way to describe it. Entering the bathroom, I saw a horrifying sight. I gasped for air. Lost, I felt as if I would collapse on the ground. Stumbling away from the bathtub, in horror, I felt like I lost my mind. I've seen things before, not often like this. Dark crimson blood filled my dingy bathtub. Death-stained handprints filled the walls. My hand trembled uncontrollably, shivering like a chihuahua. Unbalanced, I stumbled towards the top drawer. Faster than I thought was humanly possible. I swung open the drawer, grabbed a yellow bottle, threw open the lid, as its contents flew everywhere. Without thinking, I snatched one of the pills and shoved it down my throat. I turned back to the tub. It was empty. That's enough for today. Overwhelmed, I headed towards my bed and threw myself in. I tried to shut my eyes and sleep, yet a pit grew in my stomach knowing they were watching me. As I shut my eyes, still tense, I heard one loud knock on the door. Clop. I ignored it. Then I heard a sound like two knives against each other. Constantly, I shut it out, but the noises grew louder. Clop, clop, clop. Slow and steady it beat against my door. I felt a shadowy figure loom over me. Crying out in agonizing pain, I threw my head up and shrieked. Looking towards my arm, I saw red-stained deep cuts all along my skin. Worn blood gushed down to my hand. I sat there unable to think, feeling cold and dry as warm blood continuously pooled in my hand. I lay dead in my bed. Just as I felt regained and relived, my stomach was slashed open, feeling as if my guts would get strung out. I blacked out, everything going dark with on thought left. The eyes still lay on me. Covered in pain, I was unable to move. Slowly, I came back to my senses and opened my eyes. Looking into the trustworthy face of my therapist, I announced sluggishly, "That's it. Your thoughts. No need to worry. After you came to your senses, you saw it was not real. And to confirm it as a fact, you have no cuts or scars," she confidently stated. "It was just your imagination. This is why it's important to remember to take your medication." I told her I agreed, but I always knew she was wrong. I didn't tell her as I knew she would say I was crazy and disagree. I'm not sure what happened, but when I woke up, I looked at my arms. Not a scratch. And yet, my pale, thin stomach had the words, "Don't trust anyone," carved into my frame. I can't even count how many times I've tried to explain myself, to show who I really am, but every time, it's always the same thing. No one takes me seriously. It feels like I'm invisible, a ghost trapped in a language no one understands. Even Jake, my best friend, the one who should know me better than anyone, always sees me as the guy who's just joking around, exaggerating. He doesn't realize that sarcasm is my way of voicing my darkest, most twisted thoughts, and it eats away at me slowly. The other night, we were all gathered in my old family apartment. It was a cold, damp autumn night, and outside, rain was pouring down, seeping through the cracks in the windows. The walls were peeling and stained with humidity, a stale, moldy smell that never left. That place was nothing but a hollow shell, filled only with memories and cold. We sat there, beers in hand, and somehow the conversation drifted to dreams and nightmares. Without even realizing it, I started telling them about mine. It's always the same. I walk into the town church, dark and damp like a cave, where the air seems thick with painful silence. I walk towards a casket, the only thing clear in the darkness. I feel everyone's eyes on me, each step growing heavier, as if my legs are going to give out. I reach the coffin, and when they ask me to speak, my voice cracks before I can even form a word. Every time, it's the same nightmare. I try to say what I feel, to talk about how much I miss that friend I lost, but I can't. The words slip away, leaving me trapped in silence, and tears keep streaming, hot and relentless, until I finally wake up, exhausted, with my face wet. But there's something worse. Every time I dream, the face in the coffin changes, becoming that of another friend or a family member. Every night, without rest, like a curse, when I finished telling them, everyone burst out laughing. Jake laughed the loudest. To him, it was just a way to lighten the mood, but I didn't find it funny at all. I felt a strange rage building inside me, a sickness that kept growing. How could he not understand? How could he laugh so easily? I waited patiently, keeping calm. One by one, the others left, and I stayed alone with Jake. He kept joking around, but me, I just stared at him. He looked like a faded shadow of who he once was, a guy with the last traces of his teenage self on his face, now dark and wormed down by the same anxieties that were consuming him. Every part of him disgusted me, even the sweat that mingled with the moldy, frigid air of the room. And something inside me snapped. One barely remember what happened next. When Jake went to the bathroom, I followed him. I can barely recall it. He turned around, surprised, and there was an embrace cold, empty. Then, somehow, I pushed him. I felt his head hit the shelf with a dull, muffled sound. I thought he'd fall instantly, but he started thrashing, hitting back, trying to break free. The more I pushed, the harder he fought, until finally, after a long struggle, everything went still. His eyes wide open, staring with that expression. It didn't even look like Jake anymore. Only his mouth, in some way, was the same, with that right comber slightly lifted, like he was still about to laugh. Yesterday, at his funeral, I was in the church. It was identical to my nightmare. The casket was there in the center in that cold, heavy silence. They called me up to speak. When I stood, the pain hit me, crushing like a wave. In front of me were his parents, shattered, and his sister, pale as a ghost. I tried to speak, but my voice was only an echo in my head. Just like in the dream, the words wouldn't come out, choked by my sobs. I felt the tears filling me, drowning me, and for a moment, I wondered if I was still asleep. This morning, I woke up crying, with Jake's name caught in my throat. I've been trying to call him for 2 hours now, but no one picks up. The bastard never picks up. I woke up to a strange stillness. Usually, the first thing I feel is her breathing. Even in sleep, our bodies move together, a synchronized rhythm of inhales and exhales. But this time, something was off. There was no rise, no fail, just an eerie stillness. My mind was sluggish, as if it was trying to catch up with reality. I reached over, instinctively, to shake her awake with our arm. She always hates when I jostle her, but it usually works. This time, though, her body was limp, cold. I jerked my hand back as if I'd touched something forbidden. "Jenna?" My voice cracked. No response. She always responds, even when she's annoyed. I try again, this time louder, panic seeping in. "Jenna, wake up. Come on." Nothing. I feel the icy creep of dread start from the base of my spine and spread outward. I can't breathe. No, this isn't happening. I push against her side, harder now, her head lowless awkwardly. Her heart is racing, but half of it feels still cold, lifeless, failing me. My twin is dead. I'm trapped against a corpse. The air suddenly feels heavy, thick like I'm drowning. I try to pull away, to roll off the bed, but I can't. We're stuck together, literally, figuratively. Her weight drags at me, dead and heavy. My own chest tightens. Our heart, how long do I have? How long before it stops working for me too? I'm already sweating, panic crawling over my skin like 1,000 spiders. I reach for my phone, fumbling with trembling hands. I dial 911, stuttering through an explanation to the operator. I don't even know what I'm saying, just that she's dead. And I'm not, but I'm going to be. I feel it. We're sending an ambulance. Stay calm. Stay calm? How am I supposed to stay calm when half of me is dead? Minutes feel like hours as I sit there, trapped against her body. Her face is slack, eyes half open, staring at nothing. I can feel her decay beginning, a faint smell I can't ignore. My body is still functioning barely, but I feel this creeping wrongness deep inside, like our shared organs are falling, shutting down one by one. My breath is shallow, too fast. I can't tell if it's panic or if our lungs are starting to give up. I don't want to die. I don't want to die like this, next to her, part of her, but alone. The paramedics burst in, their faces grim when they see us. One of them places a hand on my shoulder, trying to offer reassurance, but I see it in their eyes. They know. I'm a dead girl walking. We'll try to help, one says, but I hear the doubt. They don't have time to separate us. There's no time for anything. I close my eyes, trying not to think about the fact that soon I'll be as cold as she is, and there's nothing I can do. I heard a creaking sound from downstairs. I got up to see what it was. Sarah was still sleeping soundly. The noise, it was coming from the garage. I tiptoed silently, making sure not to make any noise. As I swung open the door to this old blind-looking woman with horrible white eyes, she spoke in a language I couldn't understand. Babe, where are you? Sarah woke up. She walked down the hall she would always walk down. She noticed the garage was open. She went to close it as she got some water and head back upstairs down the hall she always walked down. But this time she got the chills. Something wasn't right. She heard a voice that sounded like Brad. Maybe he was waiting for her back in bed. Maybe he just wanted to scare her. The voice got louder. Sarah, help. Brad, where are you? Sarah's heart raced more, the sweat dripping down her head. Her hands become all clammy, and she turned on the hallway light. No Brad, just the pictures of them. But there was a picture she never remembered being there. It was frameless. She walked up to it, and it was a picture of Brad. The eyes moved. Sarah jumped back and hit her head on the wall behind her. The picture talked. Help me, Sarah. She trapped me here. The voice was Brad, but all distorted and creepy. What happened to you, babe? Am I dreaming? Is this a dream? No, babe, it is not. This old woman did this to me. She was a witch. I don't know why she did this to me. 3 weeks prior. Don't worry, Jane. Sarah will never know. Just come on, baby, take off your clothes. Lay on the bed and let me show you real love. I'm nervous, Brad. What if she finds out? Jane's heart was racing as she was laying on the bed in her purple bra and panties. Fuck her. Let her find out. Now, oh yes, that witch. I summoned her from the book of spells I've had. I sure a spell for cheating asshole husbands, and I used it. Sarah, babe, please. She didn't mean anything. It was only like one time. Sarah smiled as she went back to bed as Brad became another picture on the wall next to all the other guys that have done her wrong. I am so shocked at Daniel because he knows how to spell murder. It was just like any other day, and me and Daniel got together to hang out. We went out for some food and we walked around the area just talking about random stuff. Then Daniel had something to say to me. He couldn't get it out at first, but after much persuasion I managed to get it out of him. He told me that he now knows how to spell murder. I couldn't believe it, and if he knows how to spell murder, then that means that he has murdered someone. I kept grilling him about who he had murdered, and he wouldn't say. I kept asking him to tell me on how to spell murder, and Daniel spelt it correctly. Every time that he spelled murder correctly, I saw his reputation die. I couldn't believe that Daniel had the ability to murder, and now he knows how to spell it. You will only know how to spell something when you have committed the crime. So Daniel knowing how to spell murder, that definitely means that he has murdered someone. I guess you truly don't know someone until you truly get to know them. I asked random people if they knew how to spell murder, and they each got it wrong. I even got into a fight with someone because they thought I was trying to accuse them of something. After the fight, I now knew how to spell violence after a lifetime of not knowing how to spell it. I kept asking Daniel to spell murder, and he spelled it correctly every time. I then shouted at him to spell it wrong, and he did try to spell it wrong, but he couldn't anymore because he is a murderer. I kept grilling him about why he did such an act and why he would go so low. Daniel wasn't saying much, and he asking me to accept that he was a murderer. Then he told me to spell murder as well. I laughed at him until I became frightened. I became frightened because I knew how to spell murder as well. I kept spelling put murder, and Daniel told me that it was okay. We were both murderers. Daniel told me that when someone murders someone, the murderer will finally know how to spell murder, and the victim will also know how to spell murder. Why could he not want to learn words like fun, enjoyment, and laughter? Then I became frightened even more because I also knew how to spell fun, enjoyment, and laughter. So I was murdered, and it was for fun, laughter, and enjoyment? Daniel looked at me and said, "Go in peace now." In a small, unassuming town, a thrift shop sat at the corner of Maple Street. Among the dusty shelves of old books, scratched records, and forgotten trinkets, there lay a single vintage tape with a handwritten label. "Watch me, Ellen," a 20-year-old college student, spotted the tape while browsing. Something about it drew her in. Curiosity won over caution, and she bought it for $1, thinking it might be a forgotten home movie or an obscure horror film. That night, she invited a few friends over to watch it, hoping for a laugh at whatever lo-fi weirdness the tape might contain. They huddled around the screen as the static-filled display flickered to life. The screen showed an empty, dark hallway with a single door at the end. A flickering light swung back and forth above the door, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Suddenly, footsteps echoed, loud and distinct, but no one appeared in the frame. "Maybe it's a prank tape," Ellen laughed nervously, but her friends were silent, their faces tense as they watched. The camera moved closer to the door, and from behind it, a faint scratching could be heard. As it approached, the scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if something trapped inside were desperately trying to escape. The door rattled, and the screen went black. A text flashed across the screen. "Are you watching?" Everyone shivered, but no one wanted to admit they were scared. Then the screen shifted, showing an image of Ellen's house, her very living room, filmed from the outside window. Her friends gasped, looking around as if expecting someone to appear. How did they get this footage?" One of them whispered. The camera moved from room to room, each shot eerily still, pausing in front of a door leading to the basement. The sound of breathing filled the room, deep and slow. Ellen recognized it as her own. Suddenly, the basement door in the footage swung open, and the camera peered down into the darkness. A shadowy figure was at the bottom of the stairs, looking up. Before anyone could speak, the screen cut to black, leaving them in silence. Terrified, Ellen ran to turn off the TV, but before she reached it, the screen flickered back on by itself. The last image froze on the screen. It was her own face, staring back at her, pale and terrified, with something standing right behind her. She turned around.